Hello, everyone, and welcome to our latest edition of Charity Pulse. My name is Catherine Rastomji. I'm a partner and head of charities at Shakespeare Martineau, and I'm joined today by my regular co-hosts, James Saunders, audit charity partner at Moore Kingston Smith, and Charles Mosquita, charity investment director at Quilter Cheviot. So, latest stories this week in the stifling heat that I'm definitely struggling with, but others may be cooler by the time you listen to this. But different stories capturing our eye really in the charity press. The first one, I could take over from Charles and be slightly Victor Meldrew-esque myself in the annual Public Trust in Charities survey. The research that is carried out by the Charity Commission has been carried out for 2026, and a slight drum roll slash possible plot spoiler would be that the score this year is exactly the same as it was last year and the year before that. So query whether an annual research survey is actually demonstrating anything, or perhaps it's too frequent and asking perhaps not the right questions. But if we park all of that to one side, Charles, was there anything particularly that jumped out to you in the story? I particularly liked the reference to that trust, engagement, and giving form a virtuous and vicious cycle, just to add a bit of excitement and sort of Hunger Games to this.
Yeah, so I mean, it always amuses me of who's at the bottom of the pile, where you've got MPs, government ministers, and newspapers. Probably a bit harsh on newspapers. I think the one thing I would say, I agree with you. I think producing this annually is not very clever. However, I think that the tone of the report and the emphasis on the overall trust and confidence in the sector remains high, I think is a good thing, and just a reassurance of that. The couple of things I picked up on is the sector's voice has grown, which I think is a positive thing, and I don't know how much that is linked into the Labour government and the relationship that the sector has, but definitely it deserves that. And then the final thing was around the old perennial thing about overheads were necessary, but should be kept to a minimum as possible. And I think that, again, the narrative there, which we've discussed in the past, is that if you want a well-run charity, you need a strong infrastructure, and that means that there are overhead costs. And I think people just need to realise, and it goes back to this thing of how much information we give to individuals, where if you go to a restaurant, you don't ask for a breakdown of the bill and who's getting what. You just judge it on the food that you've received and the service.
It's interesting as well, isn't it, how it is such a snapshot. So one of the questions was, what has been heard or seen about charities in the news? And Captain Tom Foundation was 3% of responses in 2024, 5% of responses in 2025, 0% of responses in 2026. So, that news cycle moves on quickly, doesn't it? I think for what was a hot story at the time, and then, people forget about it and think about something else. But James, anything that jumped out to you?
Yeah, I think that's similar vein to Charles, really. I think they could move to you don't have to do it every year. I mean, it's a lot of, you only just finished one, you're going to be starting the next, aren't you? It's like an audit. I mean, it struck me that there was perhaps the signs of maybe a bit of like polarization here, because the general trend seemed to be, there was a suggestion that fewer people are involved in charities now, and fewer people are using them, fewer volunteers, that sort of thing. It's just that slight contraction, while the values are going up, the contribution and the monetary values are going up. So perhaps fewer people are involved to a greater extent. And that is a little bit of a worry if you're getting that sort of polarization, and perhaps fewer people starting to use charities or getting involved, because you're moving towards an over-reliance on a smaller group of people in all facets of this. And I just got that feeling from this survey. Perhaps a little bit of a warning sign, maybe.
I think the other thing that comes out, doesn't it, is on the financial pressures, and there seems to be a tailing off of people giving money. And now partly that's to do with cost of living crisis, and I think individuals' disposable income and being able to give. But there was a comment in there around there was a feeling of people were disillusioned with larger charities, and just the impact of what they're having. So I thought there were some interesting trends which I think, sort of people should just be alerted to, because it is sending some warnings out there, I think.
I mean, Catherine, there was a comment towards the end of the summary, if you like. Clear benefits of using commission guidance. Trustees who use commission resources regularly demonstrate stronger knowledge of all sorts of things. Well, okay, that's a double-edged sword, isn't it? Great that the guidance is there, but the trustees have then got to have the time and space to be able to use it and read it. Yeah, I'm not saying that it's not a good thing to have it there, but if there's if you have to be a good trustee, you have to have read it. If that's the sort of logical consequence, I don't know. Is that really what we want? Do we want trustees to be overly regulated, or having to have a strong knowledge of legal responsibilities to be able to fulfil their role? I don't know if that's quite where we want to go.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And I've got a new client this week actually, because people weaponize the Charity Commission's guidance to then quote it back to, advance their personal vendetta or cause against the charity, and will quote it as if that's the commission literally in their ear, backing them up with, "You're absolutely right. Tell them about this from CC3." So I think that sometimes the gap between they may know the guidance, but they're not actually applying it to the circumstances, and they're not applying it in the spirit of how it's intended. I think in some respects that guidance can be, used as part of this arsenal of how to, keep a dispute running is, part of the issue, I think, in quoting the guidance.
Welcome to the world of charity investment. The people have used the guidance and weaponized it for the last 10 to 15 years. I mean, it is shocking what some people will do, and the lengths that they will go to terrify trustee boards into things that they should be doing, when in reality, that's not what the intention of those guidance is or what it is actually saying.
It's a good point. Yeah. So speaking of weaponization and terror, so 1 in 4 charities have reported that they have been directly affected by divisions. So that is impacted by polarization and division in society, including vandalism, protests, changes in the level of support, or having to stop or change their services. So this is a further research by the Charity Commission that's come up with these findings. So it is a bit of a depressing read and headline. James, I'll come to you first on this one then, whether you'd been able to see some of this and does this reflect your
Yeah.
experiences of working with clients?
Not personally recently. I mean, I've seen a couple of trustees butt heads in the past, but having said that, the reporting at the moment, there's a lot of this. There is a lot of disagreement between people inside charities, whether that is trustees between themselves, whether that is on boards, whether that is between CEO. I mean, we reported on the railway. Do you remember that railway charity from a few months ago, where the CEO resigned because of a complete lack of support or lack of faith? And actually, just today, I thought, since we had this today, it was a very appropriate time for one to pop up on one of my updates. A chap from the John Muir Trust has published his resignation letter on LinkedIn, the full letter, and an excoriating review of the chair and the CEO relationship there, and how they are personally failing the charity. I mean, it's all on LinkedIn, and there's a lot of commentary about it as well. And this is absolutely to your point, Catherine, a great big complete disagreement between people inside a charity. And of course, social media, or in this case, LinkedIn, you can write what you want on there and get it out there.
Yeah. Charles, did you have a happier interpretation or?
No, I think, I mean, I never quite understand why people play out these issues, what I call internal issues, out in the public domain, and I think people don't necessarily realize the damage it does and the ease of which social media allows that to happen. I think this is a bigger issue, but I think this is more of a societal issue. And those, if you think about not the internal issues, but actually external, which this was also covering, particular charities that involve in human rights, refugees, religious and racial harmony have been very much so, seem to be targeted. And I have to say, I do have first-hand experience of that, and it is very, very unpleasant. But to me, that's a bigger societal issue of where we are, and a lesser tolerance going on, and we certainly seem to be seeing it across the pond in a greater way by all reporting. I don't know quite how you come back from this, but I suspect this is the normal sort of pattern that you have from a social cohesion and the move that is going on at the moment, which no doubt will come back again to more of a centre ground.
Yeah, and I suppose the hope that, your average person in the street will support charities more as a result, maybe. I know one of my hospice clients this week has been the victim of vandalism for one of their kind of sorting offices for their donations for charity shops, and the damage and the upset that that's caused to the volunteers there. And I just think what a depressing example of what happens, and whether that was completely just mindless vandalism, but I suppose the impact of that. But I can only hope that the community would then rally round and get behind that and support them even more.
I mean, one hopes that we as a nation have a sense of decency and fairness that will not accept or tolerate this sort of behaviour, and I hope that isn't wishful thinking.
Yeah. So moving on, my next one is that the Charity Commission has removed and disqualified a trustee from two charities that were connected, and the Charity Commission had opened two investigations into Jesus Powerhouse Ministries and the Centre for Skills Enhancement. Two charities that were registered in 2009 and 2006. Various issues around financial mismanagement, allegedly, but also the sums involved are in no way insignificant. So, one of the charities that was mentioned, just under £500,000 was transferred into the personal bank accounts of this trustee and her husband. We've also seen mention of the other charity failing to properly account for £652,000 worth of gift aid claims over a period of 5 years. So plenty to go at, I suppose, in terms of evidence there. I'm thinking numbers, James, so I'm coming to you first, which is a stereotype, I know, but any comments from you, either on the gift aid or generally, I suppose, on the accounting practices that were reported here?
Yeah, the numbers are significant and don't seem to correlate to public records. I have to say, I'm not quite sure that I'm looking at the right charity or charities in this case, but it doesn't seem to work with what's on the public record. I mean, in terms of the gift aid, we know HMRC are doing a whole bundle of gift aid investigations at the moment and finding some basically, fraud in gift aid applications. It is clearly an area that has been, in a minority of cases, unfortunately, abused, and they are identifying that there are some real problems around some of these cases. This one is failing to properly account for gift aid claims. Now, that's not to say that someone's fraudulently claiming and running off with the money, which is the worst cases that HMRC are publishing at the moment. But clearly the record keeping here has been rubbish. And it also refers to the report a significant number of altered receipts in order to, it says, the trustee said they'd been done to record expenditure in a different accounting year. Well, the reporting says it's a serious breach of proper accounting practice, absolutely, but it's also fraud. When all's said and done, window dressing in accounts is fraud. So they're going to be on the hook for that sort of thing as well. The whole thing just seems to be an absolute disaster. And unfortunately, it's another kick in the teeth of good charity governance when charities can carry out this sort of reckless and unsupervised activity.
Yeah, and I can only hope that they were properly constituted when they were registered, because it does reference they only had two trustees, which would show you why this sort of, management of conflicts of interest wasn't addressed, perhaps. But yeah, lots that were wrong here. Charles, had you had a chance to see this one?
Yeah, I mean, so the bits that I sort of picked up is, I mean, the investigation seemed to take 3 years, which seems a disproportionately long time. Like you, having a sole trustee where the Constitution requires at least three wide. How did that red flag show up on the Charity Commission's register, and are they monitoring these things? Because from that, if you've got only one, that should send enormous alarm bells around from a governance point of view. And then the final thing was was around the personal bank accounts, and obviously there was activity or they were funding in was it Nigeria, and again, it would have been useful to have a bit more of an explanation, but I suspect what's gone on is that their normal banking arrangements under the charity, they were struggling to be able to move money out to Nigeria. And therefore, the way they got round that was by putting it into their personal bank accounts, which clearly is not an acceptable way of doing it. But it does show us like an issue around on the banking with banking arrangements. So, and the only final thing, which of course is always the question I ask, is actually how much money has been misappropriated, if anything's been misappropriated, and that's the one thing that's not covered in the report. Because then my next question is, if it has been misappropriated, how are they recovering it?
Yeah. And James, I thought you were very restrained not to reference the, quote, reckless appointment of the same accountant to both of these charities who'd been doing their accounts for the financial years 2013 to 2021, and during that time consistently failed to comply with the SORP, indicating sustained shortcomings in the quality of the accountant's work. So that was not a great move either, was it?
Well, I don't think it's reckless to have the same accountant, but it's reckless to have an accountant that is rubbish.
Yeah.
And doesn't know doesn't know what they're doing. That is unfortunately, it's rare. I'd like to say it's rare, and the vast majority of accountants who carry out any sort of audits, accounting, independent exams, know that they've got to be pretty hot on this sort of stuff. But this was clearly a disaster.
But James, are there any consequences for the accountant? Because isn't there an obligation if you find something, you have to report it?
Yes, there is, but if you don't know about it, you're not. It's just you're rubbish in the first place. You're not don't know what you're doing. The consequences are that you could get found. You could get investigated by the ICAW if you're claiming to be a chartered accountant. I don't know. I have to say I don't know how these guys are registered. But independent exams, this is one of my bugbears with independent exams is sometimes they can be taken for granted and done very, very poorly. And until there is a better attitude to independent exams in particular, I don't know, but I would imagine this is probably below the audit threshold, even though there's some quite large numbers involved.
So you think this is an
audit each year?
Independent examination.
This is the problem, Charles. The difference between the audit and the independent exam regimes is enormous.
But it does strike you that that there should be consequences, that if as a professional you're actually doing something you're not qualified to do, yes, or things, is that actually the consequences should be, because then that would stop people from doing this.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there is. I don't know in this case whether they were poorly, ill qualified, ill equipped to do it, or whether they were appropriately qualified and did it badly. There is a slight there is a difference.
Yeah, massive difference.
But yeah, I mean, when all's said and done, the whole thing just is very, very bad on whoever the accountants were, on every front.
Okay, chaps, that was just a warm up, because now we have a question from one of our many, many loyal listeners. And the question we've been asked to think about is, can you each reflect on what you think the role of senior leadership is compared to trustees in defining the strategy of a charity. Is it just something the leadership does, so long as they stay within the charity's objects? Is it set by the board, or is it a joint effort? Who wants to go first?
Go on, Charles, you go first.
Well, I think this is an easy question to actually answer, in that it should be a partnership between the two. I mean, I know legally the trustee board is responsible for strategy, but actually, because the senior leadership team or the staff are there going to be implementing it, you need to have both working together in agreement, so actually that it gets delivered. I think I think it would be a more interesting question asked about the difference between strategy and planning and plans. And I think that is something that the boards and senior leadership teams get confused by.
Yeah, it's a co-production, isn't it, Catherine? It's a bit like a Venn diagram where you've got, the bits that each are responsible for and specialize in, but actually a lot of it is in the middle ground, and hopefully it all comes together to form that positive strategy. The trustees have responsibility for it, have to take ownership of it ultimately. Of course, that's what the legalities are, and that's the fundamental. They should set the direction, if you like, and then of course the leadership team, if you like, are there to develop the detail behind it and to implement it as well. They've got to see on both sides that it's being appropriately used. So as I say, that's sort of a co-production between both camps, if you like. That would be what I'd say.
Yeah, definitely agree with both of you on that. I think where I have seen it is sometimes the worst of examples, where it literally becomes a battleground where the chief exec sort of down tools and says, you're legally responsible to set the strategy. Go on then, and I'll wait for it to land on my desk. And I don't know if that's a point scoring thing to then fight back and say this was rubbish or you don't know what you're doing. And then the flip side, I think sometimes trustees being too conscientious and saying we're supposed to set the strategy, we better go out and research it, rather than they are surrounded by experts that work within the charity and they should be listening to them. So definitely co-production, but I also think it's then about how you monitor, whether it's KPIs, whether it's progress against the strategy, how, the strategy is then taken by the senior management and put into effect. And the trustees are the ones that keep a watching brief on what are we doing, how are we performing, is it going the way that we hoped it would? Do we need to pivot or, change in any way? So it definitely, and I like the example, James, of the Venn diagram. What I sometimes see is the two competing forces facing off against each other with a gap down the middle. We definitely don't want a gap in this because stuff's going to get missed, rather than the best work would be a joint piece of work.
The time I've seen actually doing a strategic review has worked. One is I think if you do it every 4 or 5 years, not every 2 or 3 years. And the second thing is if you can afford it, I know there are a lot of charities where they can't, but actually getting somebody independent to come in and really challenge you and take you through the process. Because I always find with a lot of when you have these discussions about what your strategy should be, is you keep reverting back to your comfort zone of where you are and what your plan is, rather than really challenging of what you should be doing, where you should be going, and how that should be changing. And that to me is, again, having sufficient time and space, getting away from the day to day and actually having time to really think about how your environment is changing and how you should be responding. So it's a good question, but ultimately it has to be something done in partnership and sufficient time has to be given to it.
Excellent. Well, thank you, chaps, and thank you to our now favourite listener who sent us a question in. So if others want to follow suit, feel free to send any thoughts or queries for us to have a chat about. Thank you for listening. We hope you found this an interesting session. Feel free to like, listen, follow, share with contacts and friends. Very much welcome any feedback on these sessions, and we hope you can join us on the next one.